She looked out of place on the firing line. Small frame, civilian clothes, no insignia. Lieutenant Cooper saw weakness. He pressed record, mocked her, laughed. Then she pulled the trigger. 10 shots. 10 bullseyes. He didn't know her call sign until the general whispered it. Agent Lowell. They thought she didn't belong. What they didn't know was she trained the ones who did. Stick around, because when arrogance meets legend, only one survives the fallout. Let us know where you're watching from and what time you found this. We read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. Lieutenant James Cooper stalked across the firing range, his polished boots crunching on shell casings as he positioned himself directly behind the small civilian woman. Her presence here was an insult to everything the range represented: precision, power, military excellence. He smirked, phone already recording, anticipating the embarrassment he'd capture. This would be his most viral post yet. "Ma'am," he drawled, letting condescension drip from every syllable. "You might want to consider the ladies' self-defense course instead. This is a professional facility." The surrounding officers snickered, their amusement feeding Lieutenant James Cooper's sense of superiority. He adjusted his commander's pin, his personal trophy of authority, watching it gleam under the harsh range lights. She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. Something about her stillness made Lieutenant James Cooper's chest tighten, but he pushed the sensation aside. "Let's see what you've got," he announced loudly, making sure his phone captured every moment. "Hashtag civilian fail is about to trend, boys." The rangemaster's command cut through the air. "Fire." The rapid-fire succession of shots exploded like thunder, each round finding its mark with surgical precision. 10 shots, 10 perfect bullseyes, each bullet hole touching the last, forming an impossibly tight group that even he, with 20 years of experience, couldn't match. Lieutenant James Cooper's phone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the concrete with a crack that echoed his shattering composure. Behind him, a sharp intake of breath from General Morrison cut through the sudden silence. "Agent Lowell," the general's voice trembled, "I didn't expect to see you here." The woman, Agent Lowell, turned slowly, her eyes meeting Lieutenant James Cooper's with a gaze that stripped away every layer of his arrogance. In that moment, his commander's pin felt like it was burning against his chest. "Lieutenant James Cooper," she spoke his name for the first time, her voice carrying across the now silent range. "Perhaps you'd like to explain why you felt the need to record this." She gestured to his fallen phone, where the video was still running. His mouth went dry. 20 years of military service, countless medals, and absolute authority over this range. All of it meant nothing under her steady gaze. The whispers started behind him, phones appearing as his own humiliation began spreading across social media. Cooper fail was already forming. I didn't," Lieutenant James Cooper stammered, his hand unconsciously reaching for his commander's pin, the symbol of his authority now feeling like a weight dragging him down. "Type humbled if you've ever misjudged someone," the trending video would later prompt, as millions watched his world crumble in real time. Standing there, with his authority evaporating like morning mist, Lieutenant James Cooper faced the question that would haunt him. How many others had he wrongly judged, dismissed, or humiliated? And more terrifyingly, how many of them might be watching his downfall right now? His fingers traced the edge of his commander's pin, remembering all the times he'd used it to intimidate others. Now, under the merciless range lights and Agent Lowell's unwavering stare, he wondered if he'd ever deserved to wear it at all, Have you ever stood at the peak of your power, only to realize you're standing on a foundation of sand? Lieutenant James Cooper had, and as the first comments and shares began flooding in, he knew this was only the beginning of his fall. Lieutenant James Cooper's hands trembled as he stared at the classified files spread across his desk, the weight of his sterling lieutenant's insignia suddenly feeling like lead against his chest. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across documents that shattered everything he thought he knew. 3 hours had passed since that humiliating scene at the range, and each new discovery about Raina Lowell sent another crack through his carefully constructed world view. Subject demonstrates unprecedented accuracy under extreme conditions, one heavily redacted report read. Cooper's throat tightened as he recognized the signature at the bottom. General Matthews himself, the legendary Special Operations Commander. The same man Cooper had desperately tried to impress for years, had written glowing assessments of the woman he'd just publicly mocked. The shredder's mechanical whir from the adjacent office made Cooper flinch. Was someone destroying evidence of her existence? His fingers traced the edges of yet another technical paper authored by Lowell, this one detailing revolutionary ballistics theories that went far beyond his comprehension. The same woman he'd dismissed as a civilian amateur had been reshaping military doctrine while he was still in basic training. "Looking for something specific, Lieutenant?" The voice behind him belonged to Master Sergeant Chen, and Cooper's spine stiffened at the barely concealed contempt in his tone. "Or just digging yourself a deeper hole?" "I'm conducting a routine background check," Cooper replied, the lie tasting bitter. His hand unconsciously moved to polish his insignia again, a nervous tic he'd developed since earning his rank. The brass felt cold under his trembling fingers. The next file made his blood run cold. 3 death certificates, each from different decades, each bearing Raina Lowell's name. All classified far above his pay grade. What kind of operative needed multiple official deaths? The kind, he realized with growing dread, that shaped history from the shadows while men like him strutted around in their pressed uniforms, believing their rank made them superior. Have you ever discovered that your entire worldview was built on sand? Comment below if you've had your assumptions shattered. Cooper's computer pinged. Another notification about the video of his confrontation with Lowell going viral. #Cooper Crash was trending, with millions watching him make a fool of himself. But the public humiliation paled compared to the growing horror of understanding just who he'd attempted to intimidate. "Sir?" His assistant's voice cracked slightly. "General Matthews' office called. He'd like to see you first thing tomorrow morning." Cooper's fingers clutched his insignia so hard the edges bit into his palm. The same insignia he'd polished this morning while rehearsing how he'd put that civilian instructor in her place. Now, it felt like a child's toy, a prop in a game he'd never understood. The sound of footsteps approaching his office sent his heart racing. Each passing shadow made him wonder how many other civilian instructors were really covert operatives. How many times had he dismissed someone's expertise based on his own prejudices? Another classified file revealed Lowell's involvement in operations that had made headlines, operations Cooper had studied in training, never knowing the true identity of the operative who'd made them possible. His arrogance had led him to confront a legend, and tomorrow he'd face the consequences. The shredder's growl grew louder, and Cooper wondered if his career would be the next thing torn to pieces. His polished insignia caught the light one more time, no longer a symbol of authority, but a reminder of how little he truly understood about power, capability, and his own devastating assumptions. Have you ever realized that your badges of authority meant nothing compared to real expertise? Share your story in the comments. The daylight was fading outside his office window, but Cooper couldn't leave. Each new document revealed another layer of his ignorance. Another reason why his confrontation with Lowell had been more than just unprofessional. It had been a perfect demonstration of the systemic arrogance that had blinded him throughout his career. "Lieutenant Cooper?" A junior officer appeared at his door, face pale. "Sir, you should see this. The training videos Instructor Lowell submitted last month. They're being implemented as the new standard for advanced marksmanship, effective immediately." Cooper's world tilted. The same woman he'd tried to humiliate would now be shaping how every soldier learned to shoot. His insignia felt heavier than ever as the full weight of his misjudgment pressed down on him like a physical force. The classified files seemed to mock him from his desk, each page revealing another facet of Raina Lowell's expertise that he'd been too arrogant to recognize. As night fell over the base, Lieutenant James Cooper faced the darkest truth of all. His authority had been built on prejudice, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath his feet. Lieutenant James Cooper's fingers trembled as he scrolled through the endless stream of comments flooding his viral video. What had started as his moment of triumph, mocking that civilian instructor, had morphed into a digital nightmare. The metallic tang of anxiety coated his tongue as another notification pinged, the sound now as threatening as incoming fire. "Silent Guardian in Kandahar, 2018. When everything went dark, she was our light." The comment from a decorated Special Forces veteran made Cooper's stomach lurch. He remembered that operation. It had been classified at the highest levels. The implications hit him like a physical blow. His phone buzzed again. Colonel Richards. Cooper let it ring, staring at his reflection in the black screen. The polished oak nameplate on his desk, "Lieutenant James Cooper, Range Operations," seemed to mock him now. He picked it up, turning it over and over in his sweating hands, remembering how proudly he'd displayed it just hours ago. Quiet Storm was trending worldwide. Every refresh brought new revelations, new pieces of a puzzle he should never have disturbed. Veterans from 4 continents were breaking silence protocols to defend Raina Lowell, sharing cryptic references to missions where an unnamed female operative had changed the course of history. "Lieutenant Cooper!" The sharp rap at his office door made him jump. "Command wants answers about the security breach. Now!" Cooper's hands shook as he straightened his uniform. The brass insignia he'd polished so carefully that morning felt like it was burning against his collar. He'd uploaded that video thinking he'd humiliate a civilian. Instead, he'd exposed one of the military's most closely guarded assets. His phone pinged again, this time with a direct message from an account he didn't recognize. "Remember Baghdad, 2019? She carried me 3 miles with a shattered leg. Never knew her name until your video. You've compromised years of covert operations, Lieutenant." The weight of what he'd done crashed over Lieutenant James Cooper like a wave. His arrogance hadn't just embarrassed him, it had potentially endangered countless ongoing operations. Every click, every share, every comment was another nail in the coffin of his career. The range outside his window fell silent as Raina Lowell emerged from the firing line. Even from here, Cooper could see the steel in her stride, the quiet confidence he'd mistaken for civilian awkwardness. She paused, looking directly at his office window, and in that moment Lieutenant James Cooper understood true fear. Each ping of his phone was another reminder of his catastrophic misjudgment, another thread in the unraveling of everything he'd built as Drop One. If you've ever seen pride come before a fall. His security clearance badge felt heavy in his pocket, the same badge he'd flashed so arrogantly at Raina hours earlier. Now it represented everything he stood to lose. As if reading his thoughts, his phone lit up with a message from command. Report to security office immediately. Clearance status under review. Lieutenant James Cooper stood on shaking legs, straightening his uniform one last time. Outside, that quiet storm continued to rage, dismantling his reputation with every passing second. The sound of his office door closing behind him echoed like a final verdict, marking the moment his power began to crumble. Officer James Cooper stares at his reflection in the polished conference room window, barely recognizing the man who just hours ago strutted across the firing range like he owned it. The storm outside mirrors the tempest in his gut as he stands before the stern faces of the disciplinary board, his lieutenant's insignia suddenly feeling like molten lead against his collar. Lieutenant Cooper, please state for the record your account of yesterday's incident with civilian instructor Lowell. General Martinez's voice cuts through the silence like a knife. James Cooper's hands tremble slightly as he reaches for the water glass, his throat desert dry. The viral video plays in his mind, his own sneering voice captured perfectly by a junior officer's phone. Ladies' Day at the range? How cute. The hashtag #Cooper's Comeuppance has been trending for hours, with millions watching his humiliation as Raina Lowell proceeded to outshoot him with mechanical precision. His voice cracks. James Cooper straightens his spine, forcing himself to continue. I deliberately undermined civilian instructor Lowell's authority. I recorded and shared video of her without consent, adding derogatory comments. Thunder crashes outside, making him flinch. I allowed my prejudices about gender and civilian status to cloud my judgment of a decorated veteran. The rain pounds against the windows as James Cooper recounts every detail, the mocking tone he used, the way he positioned himself to loom over her smaller frame, the dismissive hand gestures that now make him cringe watching the footage. His badge feels heavier with each admission. And your recommendations for your own disciplinary action, Lieutenant Cooper? Colonel Chen's question hangs in the air. James Cooper's fingers brush his insignia, remembering how proudly he'd polished it that morning, certain of his superiority. Now it burns like a brand of shame. I request immediate removal from the instructor rotation, he says, his voice growing stronger with each word. I further request assignment to civilian instructor Lowell's training program, not as an instructor, but as a student. I need to learn what true capability looks like, stripped of prejudice and assumption. The board members exchange glances. Outside, lightning illuminates the room in harsh bursts, casting dramatic shadows across James Cooper's face as he continues. I've spent 15 years teaching others how to shoot. But yesterday I learned I never understood what real mastery looks like. My arrogance nearly cost this facility one of its most valuable instructors. I need to start over. Learn humility. Learn respect. Type humble if you believe in second chances, flashes across the screen as James Cooper removes his insignia with trembling fingers, placing it on the conference table. The polished metal catches the storm's light, a final gleam before being sealed in an evidence envelope. Lieutenant Cooper, General Martinez's voice softens slightly. Your willingness to acknowledge these failures is noted. However, the damage to unit cohesion and institutional reputation requires significant corrective action. Do you understand? Yes, sir, James Cooper responds, standing straighter despite the weight of shame on his shoulders. I want to be part of the solution. I want to show others that change is possible, that we can overcome our prejudices if we're willing to face them honestly. The rain begins to ease as James Cooper signs the disciplinary documents, his signature a promise to do better. Tomorrow, he'll report to the range not as an instructor, but as a student, ready to learn from the very woman he once dismissed. The lightning has passed, but its lesson remains. Power without respect is as dangerous as a weapon without wisdom. A final rumble of thunder accompanies James Cooper as he exits the conference room, his collar notably lighter without its insignia. The chapter of arrogance has ended. The journey of redemption begins with his next step. Lieutenant James Cooper stares at his reflection in the shooting range's glass partition, the morning sun casting long shadows across his face. His insignia, once worn with such misplaced pride, now weighs heavily in his pocket like a stone of remembrance. The metal feels cold against his fingers as he traces its edges, remembering how he'd brandished it as a shield of superiority just 24 hours ago. The range comes alive with the methodical ping of precise shots. Ms. Lowell, no, Senior Operative Lowell, demonstrates a complex firing sequence with the same quiet efficiency he'd once mistaken for weakness. Each shot finds its mark with devastating accuracy, a symphony of competence that makes his previous mockery taste like ash in his mouth. "Your stance is still too rigid, Lieutenant Cooper," she observes, her voice carrying the same patient tone she's maintained throughout his redemption. No hint of vindication, no trace of the humiliation he'd tried to inflict upon her. The viral video of his arrogant display, now with over 10 million views, and the trending hashtag #CooperLearns, feels like a lifetime ago. His hands tremble slightly as he adjusts his position. The indoor range's controlled environment suddenly feels overwhelming, each breath echoing with the weight of transformation. A single security camera blinks in the corner, the same one that had captured his journey from contempt to comprehension. "Power isn't measured in volume, Lieutenant Cooper," Ms. Lowell continues, demonstrating a perfect grouping on her target. "It's measured in impact." The words strike deeper than any bullet could. His own shot goes wide, and for once, he welcomes the failure. Each miss is a lesson, each correction a step away from the man who'd stood in this same spot yesterday, drunk on artificial authority. The ping of his next round finding its mark sounds different now. Humble, honest, earned. "Your insignia," Ms. Lowell says, nodding toward his pocket. "Why don't you wear it?" Lieutenant Cooper withdraws the metal badge, its surface catching the fluorescent lights. "Because I haven't earned the right to wear it yet," he admits, his voice thick with emotion. "Not until I truly understand what it means to lead." The training session continues, but it's more than marksmanship now. Each shot, each breath, each moment of guidance from Ms. Lowell rebuilds something fundamental in his character. The security footage from this session will join yesterday's viral moment, but this time documenting redemption instead of disgrace. As the final hour approaches, Ms. Lowell calls for a ceasefire. The range falls silent, save for the gentle hum of ventilation. "Leadership isn't about authority, Lieutenant Cooper. It's about understanding." She turns to face him fully. "What have you learned?" Lieutenant Cooper places his insignia on the shooting bench, the metal clicking softly against the surface. "I've learned that strength doesn't need to announce itself. That true capability isn't bound by our prejudices or presumptions." His voice carries across the empty range, steady and sincere. "I've learned that the loudest voice in the room is often the one with the most to prove, and the quietest one might be the most qualified to teach." The security camera captures this moment, too. A military officer standing at attention before his civilian instructor, humility replacing arrogance, respect replacing contempt. The footage will later go viral with #CooperTransformed, but that's not why he's here. Your final evaluation, Lieutenant Cooper, Ms. Lowell announces, sliding a fresh target into place. Show me what understanding looks like. He takes his stance, remembering every lesson, every correction, every patient word. The range fills with the precise ping of rounds finding their mark, each shot a testament to transformation. His grouping isn't perfect, it never will be, but it's honest, earned, and real. When he finishes, Ms. Lowell studies his target with the same quiet competence that had initially triggered his insecurity. Well done, Lieutenant, she says simply, but the words carry the weight of true achievement. Lieutenant Cooper picks up his insignia one last time, feeling its weight differently now. Request permission to return this to Quartermaster for reissue, he says, when I've truly earned it. Ms. Lowell's slight nod carries more validation than any previous commendation in his career. Permission granted, Lieutenant Cooper. That's precisely what understanding sounds like. Type, those are you, if you've ever had to relearn what strength really means.